Good afternoon to each one of you. We are glad that you were able to make it this afternoon, and we thank you for the effort you made to be here with us. And we are here at the third weekend of our meetings. And I'm sure that what we are going to learn here this afternoon is going to help us to live healthier and longer. I could say it will depend on what we are going to do with what we hear here this afternoon. But I'm sure that we are going to do something positive about it. Each one of us, we came here because we want to learn what we can do to live better and longer. So we have the pleasure of having with us Dr. John Baur from Colorado. Some of you met him yesterday. And this afternoon, he's going to share with us the talk about sugar, fats, and diabetes. So I invite Dr. Baur to come forward.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We're again so happy to be here with you as we're going to look at simple solutions to sometimes what are complex health conditions. And I know you have been benefited greatly by the seminars that you have attended. And if you haven't been able to attend all of the seminars, DVDs are available to follow up in the convenience of your home and see further lectures that you might have missed. But you've had studies on fats, sugars, and probably the subject of diabetes came up also. Now, in your beautiful city of Vancouver, I'm sure diabetes is not a foreign disease condition. So today we would like to look at what can we do to disarm diabetes. What are some of the things, some of the simple things we can implement and integrate into our everyday life that will disarm this condition? Now, this condition in the developed world is exploding. There are so many new cases diagnosed on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, doubles every 25 years. So every 25 years, the number of cases of diabetes is doubling. And in the world today, there are over 300 million diabetics. So this condition is very, very common. And it also affects Canadians, right? As Canadians, we're not exempt from this condition. As a matter of fact, if you see Canada on the World Healthcare Organization chart, there it is, and it's moving up very, very quickly. Here we see on a bar graph kind of a visual depiction between sex and age of this condition as it affects people. Obviously, as we get older, we see a greater prevalence of the condition, and the blue there represents males versus females. So more men are affected by this condition than women. Here we see where British Columbia is in terms of Canada as it relates to diabetes. We look at the very top there, we see the Canadian average, then we see all of the various provinces, and there is British Columbia. British Columbia is not doing too bad, especially when you compare to Newfoundland. Newfoundland is like really, really bad in this area versus some of the other things we looked at yesterday. Newfoundland, we have here New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Yukon Territory is looking pretty good. So that is your neighboring province, is it not, to the north, Yukon? So if we could only bring all these numbers here down to that, that would be a real movement in the right direction. Now, the laws of nature are very fixed. Natural laws cannot be much altered or modified. Water freezes at, well, in Celsius at 0, right? 32 Fahrenheit. Boils at 100 degrees Celsius, 212 Fahrenheit. We can't change these things. In other words, there is in nature certain principles from cause to effect. And I want to use again something for the purpose of illustration today from the natural world, from the world that we are exposed to on radio and on television and what we read about in the papers that helps us understand this principle as it relates to this condition. And unfortunately, I will again use something that happened in Colorado because it made national and even international news. For a period of time, about 3 weeks ago, we were living in a constant state of smog and smoke because we had more than a dozen fires in our state at the same time. And here was a fire that occurred very, very close, more uncomfortably close than I wish, to where I live. I live about up in here. This fire here started the 23rd, and then the 24th. It shows the various colors, how it expanded, and then all of a sudden it blew up. And it just grew, gobbling up hundreds and thousands of acres in a very short period of time. Now, fires occur in different places of the country, and you have them here in Canada too, I'm sure. Although around this area where it's so humid, I don't think it burns too often, right? It's quite humid. But you see, there are certain things in nature that predispose something from happening. Now, we had record temperatures. We had temperatures in the month of June that on the Fahrenheit scale exceeded 100 degrees in June. 100-degree temperature days, record temperature days. In combination to that, we had weeks and weeks of no rain at all. So what does that mean? High temperature, no moisture in the air. And fires were beginning everywhere. Some were intentionally set by arsonists. Others were the consequence of lightning strikes. But you know, lightning strikes trees all the time. Not far from my house, there's a lightning that struck a tree, and the tree actually blew up, split right in half. And debris was scattered everywhere. Now that happened last year. We had moisture and we had mild temperatures, not so hot. So nothing happened. But when we had this hot, hot spring, record temperature, no moisture, the slightest little thing created forest fires all over our state. Now, Colorado received more than half of the entire U.S. firefighting force capability at its disposal. Aircraft, ground crews, fire jumpers, and all these other people, firefighters, they all converged on Colorado to where we had more than 50% of the entire firefighting force in our state. And yet fires were expanding. Here we see the laying down of retardant to try to put out these fires. This is what happened. In a very sudden manner, you can see here this person didn't even remove his or her car from the driveway. The fires came right down to the edge of the city of Colorado Springs. Right to the north of Colorado Springs is the Air Force Academy. And so it was an area fairly heavily populated with wonderful, beautiful homes. And people had to leave immediately. More than 30,000 people were evacuated in just a short period of time. Do you see how nature is? When things happen, man becomes almost impossible to control it or to deal with it. But the circumstances were of a kind that caused these kinds of scenes to be on our TV and in our newspapers. Now, at the very same time that this was happening in Colorado, according to the dates, and some of the pictures that I've shown you here will be actually date matched with the other ones I'm going to show you, that happened on the same day in Florida. What was going on? Nature was doing the opposite thing. It was dumping rain in bucket loads. Wasn't stopping. There were areas that received rainfall in excess of 10 to 15 inches in 1 week. So what happened there? Flooding. Flooding. Too much rain in too short a period of time. This picture was taken at the same time that I showed you the pictures of the houses burning. What do you think of that? Nature. See, sometimes we get too much of something, and other times we get not enough. See? Too much of something is not good, And not enough of something is also not good. And when nature is in disarray, when nature brings these consequences on us, whether it's in our natural everyday life or on our body, the results are devastating. People moving out of their houses, taking their belongings, their laptops. Interesting. Water right up to the top of the car, and horses walking with water up to. Then, just a week after that, just a week after these two scenarios took place, and it was interesting to see in our headline newspapers, we would have pictures of both things in the same newspaper, just on the other side of the page. One side was all burning, the other side was all flooding. In the same country, just states apart. Now, just a week later, a fairly aggressive mid-Atlantic storm hit the mid-Atlantic states. A lot of wind, and that's what this looked like. Power lines were down. Trees fell over, landed on cars and homes, and there were millions of people that did not have any power. Principles of nature, the laws of nature. When nature speaks, man can't do very much. So let's look at this condition now, diabetes, because it really relates to what I shared with you. The principle of too much or too little. And the consequences that too much or too little cause in our bodies. Here we're looking at, this is a Canadian listing or a table of deaths, the 10 leading causes of deaths in Canada in 2008. And I find it quite interesting the way the list is depicted here. Of all of the causes of death, cancer is number one at the top. Then we have heart disease and other conditions. And as we're coming down the list, where's diabetes? Right down here. Number 6. Number 6. So this is a very common and a very prevalent condition. Something else that's very interesting to note as we look at this condition in the world. As you look at this chart, you will see there on the one axis all of the different countries. You're going to see on the bar graph the height of the graph indicating the number of diabetic cases or the prevalence of this condition. And then you're going to see also in that yellow chart, there marked, the consumption of sugars. Okay? And it's interesting to kind of note here that diabetes and sugar consumption are not exactly following each other. Are you seeing that? It's quite interesting. So often we think of it, too much sugar, diabetes. Well, not always necessarily. We look at, for example, here in the U.S., we're big consumers of sugar, huge consumers of sugar, right? And now we look here in Ireland, there's quite a consumption of sugar, but very low in the diabetes area. And over here we see, look at very high in the diabetes, way above the sugar. So there is not an exact correlation between those two things. So sometimes we get into a stereotypical understanding of a disease when in reality it doesn't follow exactly maybe the norms that are portrayed in our minds. So interesting thing to see. Now, here we see the percentage of the population in North America that has issues dealing with weight. Okay? And United States and Canada are quite a bit different. You up here in Canada are doing quite well. We have here, this is the state of Colorado. It's the only state that is really green. Does that show up green up to you? I don't know what the color distinctions are that you can see. But we have only one state that is showing a little bit some competition to you folks in Canada. All of these provinces are doing quite well in terms of weight. There is obesity, except for this province here. And then when we look at people, we think of, well, weight and diabetes, is there a correlation between those things? And we're going to also look at that. Now, who does diabetes target? And are there solutions for diabetes? Well, prior to 1921, if you got diabetes, that was pretty much your death sentence, because that was the year insulin was invented. Before 1921, if you got diabetes, there was no hope or there was no help for you. But after that time, at least insulin became available to certain types of diabetics that could benefit from that. So what is diabetes? In diabetes, what we have is a problem where the blood sugar is not properly maintained in the bloodstream or in the body, where blood sugar levels are out of control. And basically there are two types of diabetes, types 2 and type 1. Type 2 diabetes is primarily adult onset diabetes. Type 1 is usually juvenile onset diabetes. Now type 2 is the one that affects approximately 90% of all the diabetics. And it's actually the one for which there are simple solutions to help treat this condition. Now, type 2 is a problem where there is not a shortage of insulin. A lot of these people, if you test them, you'll find that the insulin levels are normal. They're not elevated. But there is a blockage in the utilization and the functioning of insulin. Insulin is present, but it's not working. That's type 2. Type 1 diabetes, which is a juvenile onset, only about 5 to 10% of all the diabetics, usually younger people, that is a case where insulin is not present. So there's an insulin deficiency. And they're the ones that respond to insulin. They're insulin dependent. And with insulin injections and so forth, this condition can be treated. So how does diabetes work? See, in your body, the fuel is glucose. That's what your body burns for fuel. Just like in the car burns gasoline in order to propel. The body has a very simple fuel, and that's glucose. And all other foods, whatever you eat, if the body needs fuel, it converts it into glucose. That is our fuel. The brain, the only fuel it can function on is glucose. And here's what a glucose molecule looks like. You can see the carbons here. This arrangement, arranged that way, with your hydrogen and your oxygen, and that is your glucose molecule. Now, the way glucose works in our bodies is like this. When we eat a meal, blood sugar levels, they should kind of go in this ideal fashion. They go up a little bit, then they come down, but they don't drop too low. So things don't go up too high and things don't go down too low. They stay just very nicely in a curve. Now, if we have a condition that is either hypoglycemic or diabetic, we have a spike. Things spike up real high and then they come down real low. And that's what causes the fluctuations, the wild fluctuations in the glucose level. Now there are various indices where we can measure what foods impact us how. And one of the things that we look at is the glycemic index. The glycemic index is basically refers to the rise and the fall of the blood sugar in your body with a fixed amount of food that you eat. In other words, if you eat this kind of food, how is it going to make that blood sugar vary? Or if you eat this kind of food, how is it going to make the blood sugar vary? And based on the glycemic index, it tells us what the impact of that food is on your body. So that's one thing if you are diabetic or you know someone who is diabetic or you have an interest in the subject, something that you should be really aware of, the glycemic index as it relates to foods. Now some things, there's also the glycemic load, we don't want to talk about it, but there are some factors that affect the glycemic index and the way foods react on our body. One is the solubility of the food. how soluble is that food? Because solubility will also relate to the digestion and the absorption of the food, the digestibility of that food. If something is digestible very easily, then the energy will be released very quickly. And then also the processing of the food is also affecting the glycemic index. And here's something we want to look at, because it helps us make good food choices. Remember, I said it's not just all about sugar. Things are simple, but not quite that simple. Because we saw there are areas where there's higher sugar consumption, and actually the levels of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, were not in direct proportion to those sugar levels. Here we're looking at certain foods, and we have the glycemic index, the glycemic load, and we can see how different foods affect or challenge our blood sugar levels. We look at carrots, for example. You see the glycemic index is quite low. Peaches, quite low. All right, quite low in terms of the glycemic index, the way the things are released. Now we look over here and we see that the glycemic index for soft drinks is what? Very high. This is very soluble. The sugar is readily available. It's easily digested, very digestible. And so it releases that amount of glucose into your circulation very quickly. So we can see here the different types of food, how they affect us. See, there we have white rice. White rice is high. It's not very high, but it's high. All right. Bananas. We got brown rice. See? So let me ask you a question. This is a no-brainer. Which rice, brown rice or white rice, is going to be better for you if you have a blood sugar problem? Which has a lower glycemic index? The brown rice. The brown rice is going to be much more readily processed in our bodies. Here we're going to take now a flour, a grain product, and let's look at that. All right, we see here whole wheat. This is looking at the blood sugar level over a period of time. Hours, blood sugar. Now we see whole wheat, it just very gently. So low glycemic index releases its energy very gradually. Now on the other end, what do we see here? Is white flour. What has made the difference? Processing, solubility, digestibility. Okay? All of these factors that we shared with you has made the difference. It's the same thing. Wheat is wheat, rice is rice. Yes, but no. And there are consequences to these choices. Consequences to these choices. So, insulin is a key, making it real simple, that opens the door. The only way to get into a door that has a lock is to have a key. Insulin is the key that opens the lock of the door and allows glucose to go into the cell. Okay? Because when the level of glucose goes up, and we'll show you some illustrations on that in the bloodstream, it has to move out of there and into something else so that the level can be left really nice and constant. Insulin is the key that opens the door and allows the glucose to move into the cells for storage. And one of the organs in which glucose is stored, and it was alluded to in the study yesterday, is the liver and also muscle. Glucose is stored in those areas. So, insulin is the key. When there is no key, you can't open the door. Simple, right? Now, there's another problem. Sometimes you have a key, but the lock is gummed up and jammed up and doesn't work. And it's no longer functional because it's gummed up. You have the key, but if someone put gum on the insert portion of the lock, you can't stick your key in, so the key is no longer functional or usable. So type 1 diabetes is there's no key. Type 2 diabetes is there is a key, but the lock is gummed up. So in both cases, what do you get? You get a problem with glucose. It can't move out of the bloodstream and be stored for slow release. So that makes it real simple understanding how this condition works. Here we see the pancreas. Here we see the liver, gallbladder, stomach. We see here the pancreas is located just a little bit behind the stomach and on the opposite side of the liver. In a normal adult, it looks very much like the tongue of a large dog. Kind of shaped like that and about that size. So wonderful organ. It's actually two organs in one because it has an endocrine and an exocrine component to it. In other words, it does things where it produces something and lets it released by ducts, and it also which is exocrine, and it has an endocrine component, meaning it produces something which it puts straight into the bloodstream. So there's two functions going on in one little organ. You get two for the price of one. Amazing what it can do. Its exocrine portion is 2 liters of digestive enzymes that it produces every day. Just producing digestive enzymes every day. Amylase, lipases, and all of these kinds of enzymes are released in order to digest food. Each one of them is food specific. Amylase would be for carbohydrates, lipases would be for fatty foods, and then we have trypsin and chymotrypsin, and we have these things for proteins, and it releases these specifically generated enzymes that target certain foods for digestion. So 2 liters of that. Then the other thing it does, it has the islets of Langerhans, which are these wonderful little cells here. Let's go back just on this one and show you real quick here. See, here you see the exocrine portion. Yeah, so you see how the gland, it has all this little duct in it. Lets all of that come right out this little canal right here, which meets the canal from the gallbladder. Goes right there into the duodenum. If that ever gets plugged, then you got 2 things that are messed up. So that's the exocrine portion. Here's the endocrine portion. Okay, it has all these cells, these islets of Langerhans, and they have 2 types of cells, alpha cells and beta cells, and they make insulin, and they make glucagon, which is another enzyme. Now these two hormones, they balance each other out. So what are some of the warning signs before we get a little bit more into this condition? If you might be getting diabetes. Excessive thirst. People that are diabetic are really thirsty. Excessive urination. And an excessive appetite. Those are early signs of diabetes. Now the thing with diabetes is half of the people who have it don't know it. Half the people who have it don't know it. Because these signs of thirst and frequent urination and hungry are sometimes just put off as normal. So half of the people don't know it. The thing with diabetes is it affects your whole body. Everything. Everything is affected by diabetes. It's just some things a little more than others. But the effects of diabetes, elevated blood sugar levels for long periods of time, have devastating effects on the entire body. All of the body systems and the body organs. Now, some of the more obvious complications are eye problems, okay, which affects about 8 out of 10 diabetics have eye problems, diabetic retinopathy. So that's not very good. People lose their sight, have impaired vision. Kidney damage. You have the preposition or the proposition, the risk factor of actually having 18 times higher kidney disease if you're diabetic than if you're not. So you're predisposed to kidney damage. And then, of course, heart disease and stroke is at risk. 2 to 4 times higher incidence of heart disease and stroke in people that are diabetics. There are other more subtle complications like sexual impotency, ulcerative sores, infections, amputations, breast and uterine cancer. So the list goes on. It affects the entire body. But the first few that I shared with you are the most common. So what causes non-insulin dependent diabetes, which is the type 2, affects 90% of the people? What causes it? If we can understand and see from cause to effect, then we can do something about it. Something very simple and something very basic. Now, there were studies done on North American natives, which, by the way, some of them, more than half of their entire population are diabetics. Half of all the people are diabetics. And as they were studied, and then they were studied in other places, where they didn't have it, the same people, something was found to be the difference. It wasn't just heredity. It wasn't just destiny. Although, yes, those things, heredity has an impact on our lives, there was really something more to it. This is what the problem is. If we're looking at this blood vessel here, the blue are supposed to be the glucose molecules, okay, that little carbon chain there, 5 glucose molecules. See, the glucose is supposed to, remember we said, the way the body balances it out, when it gets a shot of energy, when it gets the fuel, the only way it balances it, it puts it in a storage department, like a pantry, so that when it needs it, it can pull it out. Just like you have a car, you have a gas tank. You put the gas in the gas tank so that you have it for a long time. You're not using it all at once. You need it over time. So this here is a cell membrane. The cells of our body are bilipid material. These are fatty molecules. They're a double layer of fat molecules. That forms the cell membrane. Now, within that cell membrane are doors, if you will. We're making it simple, that need a key to open the door to allow glucose to go in. Okay? Glucose going into the cell. There's where the key comes in. Now, when for some reason the lock is jammed up, or there is no key, then the glucose can't get into the cell. That makes it real simple. So here we see key not working, glucose builds up in the bloodstream. See how that works? That's all it is. It's real simple. Glucose can't get out of the bloodstream. So it's floating around the body, creating all kinds of damage and havoc. Because in type 2, the lock is gummed up and the key doesn't work. What are some of the factors that gum up the lock that cause type 2 diabetes? Obesity and excessive fat. So whether it's either eating fat or you've got body fat, if you've got too much fat, either one way or the other, the lock tends to be gummed up. What happens in those cases is insulin is no longer as sensitive or as functional, to make it simple. Insulin sensitivity, the key's ability to open the lock, is not present, has been reduced. And so we have this problem. Right? Inactivity. Inactivity. Actually, studies have been done, multiple studies have been done, that if we increase activity, we actually increase insulin sensitivity. Okay, we increase it. We don't decrease it, we increase it. So many diabetics can be helped just by increasing activity so that the sensitivity, the functionality of the lock, is increased and things work better. Well, here's Mr. Couch Potato. What is he? He's inactive. He's again working with his remote. Look at him there. He's enjoying high-paid athletes to exercise for him. He's watching football. I don't know what he's watching. Hockey in Vancouver, of course. Hockey. He's watching hockey. And he spends money and he enjoys other people exercising for him. While he should be exercising, not with the remote, but with his muscles and with his body. Another thing. Too many calories combined with too little exercise. And if you attended the lecture that we had that dealt with television and things like that is a big problem. Inactivity and then eating and snacking while you're watching makes a double-barreled shotgun at your condition. Now, here is something that is interesting. This was not a Canadian study. This was a U.S. study. that went over a period of time through the 60s into 2000, showing the consumption difference of beverages that people were consuming. It's interesting to note that the soft drinks, which on my computer are red, have been going up over time. People are drinking more and more of these big gulp supersized beverages. Drinking more and more of that. So what? What's wrong with that? Well, we'll look at that too. Let's look at how to disarm diabetes. Let's look at it. There's better things we can do as Canadians. You agree with that? Can we do better? We can bring our statistics down, especially being that it is in the top 10 killers. And Vancouver does not have to have as many diabetics walking the streets or in treatment facilities as they do. Because the solution is actually quite simple. We need to eat less fat. Eating less fat. Remember I shared with you, fat helps to gum up the log, reduces the sensitivity of insulin in our bodies. Need to eat less fat. We need to eat more these kinds of foods. The rainbow diet, a variety of foods need to be eaten, which will help us. We need to eat more fiber. Let me stop on this for a little bit. Eating more fiber. Do you know how much fiber you're supposed to eat? The recommended daily allowance for women is 25 grams per day. For men, 30. Do you know what the average Western fiber consumption is per day? This is for average people. 14. That's all they eat is 14 grams of fiber. See, these kinds of foods are what kind of foods? High fiber foods. People who are living on a plant-based diet, do you know how many grams of fiber they average per day? Between 60 and 70. See, well above the recommended amount. Well above the recommended amount. But yet the average for Westerners is only 14 grams a day. Now let me share with you another statistic that should really be in your minds and have the awareness to share with people. Remember, we learn as we share with others. For teenagers, the average teenager, based on caloric intake, do you know what % of their caloric intake is based on just what they drink, not what they eat? 40% of teenagers' caloric intake comes from drinking things, not eating. And when you drink a big gulp, what's the fiber content in it? Zero. Zero. Zero fiber. These big supersized sodas and drinks, and I'll include even some juices and sweetened beverages, are high in calories and very low to zero in fiber. So they're eating high calorie laden foods, low nutrients. High calorie, low nutrients. This creates a serious problem for diabetes. Because when you eat a high fiber diet, you're actually helping, remember those charts that I showed you on the glycemic index. High fiber would be whole grain. Low fiber would be highly refined grains, or white rice versus whole wheat rice. These are the kinds of foods. These are the kinds of foods that are good. For diabetics. Because they have low glycemic index, they have high fiber. And the higher the fiber content, the slower is the release of the glucose. And also, when that occurs, then we have a reserve. When the glucose is put into the cell, the way the body does it puts it all together in little chains. Each glucose molecule is chained to another. And then that creates a big long chain called glycogen. And when the body says, oh, we're running a little low, then what it does, it brings those back out and releases them. And so it's a wonderful system. So you have these two hormones, insulin and glucagon. And I'll use again another analogy. It's like in your house. You have an air conditioner and you have a heater. When it gets cold, what turns on? The heater. The heater turns on. And so it brings the heat level up in your house. Then when it gets too hot, what comes on? The air conditioner. So you got the air conditioner and the heater, the insulin, and the glucagon. So when there's too much sugar, then insulin is released, brings it down. When there's too little sugar, glucagon is released by the same little organ, the pancreas, and it brings more sugar out of the cell. Isn't it amazing how we're made? It's amazing how the balance of nature and the physiology of the human body works. These two things are so critical to our health and well-being, and they are so abused by us today. So, we need to exercise. How often? Regularly. Exercise regularly. Let me take one moment here and share something with you in terms of forming habits and regularity. If you want to make a path through the woods, what do you got to do? You got to go over it again and again, right? The more people you get walking along that path, the quicker it becomes a path, huh? The quicker you wear that path. And that's kind of how our brain is. See, we do something, but it doesn't become a habit until we have ingrained it or made a path in our brain. Okay. Now, how do we do that? By repeating it, huh? Now, the best way, if you're having problems with follow-through, and I asked you to make a decision, and I hope you've decided to implement something that you have heard from these health lectures. Something. Every day. Now, the best way to make it a habit so you don't have to think about it anymore is to repeat it. Now, repetition, in addition to increased traffic, will make that path quicker. How can we increase the traffic in our brain? The more that habit has sensory input, the quicker and the more permanently it will be imprinted in your brain. So, when it comes to exercise, here's what you do. Regular. You want to go the same place, if possible, every time. It's not like, oh, well, today I'm going to go to the gym, the next day I'm going to run in the park, the next thing I'm going to do... That works, but you're only using one thing. You want to use the same place. Why? Because you want the same sensory input. You want to put on, I'm sharing this with you, there's research that has been done on these areas. If you wear the same clothes, you smell, the same time you smell the same freshness of the morning air. You hear the same birds, huh? You see, all that sensory input, sight, smell, touch, sound, all of those senses. If all of those senses are engaged in forming the habit will be more deeply and more quickly ingrained. Does that make sense? Is that simple? Can you do it? You can do it. I can do that. So, when you form habits, think of it in that way, and it's going to help you. You want to achieve the ideal weight. What does that look like? The world is getting heavier. Obesity is a major problem. Too many of us are getting too big, and I need to work on exercising too. My wife, she buys me for my birthday a gym membership. That's what I get for my birthday. And this time around, I asked her, what do you want for her birthday? She had a birthday just a little while ago. She said, well, I think I want a gym membership too. So that's what we got for each other for our birthdays. We love each other. We want to live longer. We want to be healthy. And that's a good thing to do. This is not exercise. Now we want to look at a little bit the obesity thing. This is another thing you want to know, your BMI, your basal metabolic index. And it's merely a ratio of weight to height, kilograms over meters squared. And this is the ideal, somewhere between 18 and 24. If that ratio is, you see here, then you're overweight. And if that bounces up to here, then we get into obesity and actually morbid obesity. Now, I said this is not a problem. It is a problem. Here are studies done on boys and girls. We don't want to go through all of it. You know what? Both sexes, they're getting fatter and bigger, and they're getting weaker and less flexible. Let me share with you the less flexible and the weak. Here, sit and reach. Okay? See that? This was back in 81. This is 2007, 2009. You could reach this far, now can only reach that far. Okay? Same with the boys and the girls, only that much, that less. Down. How about grip strength? How strong are they? They should be stronger. They're working the remotes and their iPads and iPods. I don't know why. But they're getting weaker, all right? From 49 kgs to 44, from 43 to 40. So, less flexible, weaker, bigger. It's not better. You know, this is cute, but you know, this is not healthy. This is not healthy. This is not healthy. And here are the states in our country down below your border here. We've got a major obesity problem in the United States. Now these were older statistics. The newer ones are even worse. This is 2005, 2007. We have one state, the heaviest state, Mississippi. 31% of the population is obese. 31%. The slimmest state is Colorado, 18%. Still terrible. Terrible, terrible. See, in Canada, you have some problems too. You kind of compete with us in Colorado. All right? But things are getting worse, Here we look at now fructose, and I know you've had studies that dealt with different types of sugars. We see a study here, a graph that shows fructose intake and obesity. Now we talked about sugar and diabetes. We didn't see a direct correlation, but here there's a direct correlation between fructose intake and weight gain. There it is, obesity and fructose levels. Direct proportion. Now, where's fructose found in? Can someone tell me? Almost everything, especially certain beverages. Now, this is interesting. I noticed that in Canada, and the United States is probably no different, only 24% of the Canadians could identify that glucose fructose is actually fructose. So when you look at your label and it says glucose fructose, what is it? It's that undesirable sugar that is not a good sweetener for you. No? Now, 86% of Canadians agree that there should be, some better ingredient label listing and so forth. So, drink Coke, get fat. Now, that's a slap to Coke, but you know that's Pepsi, that's Dr. Pepper. It's all the same. And these high fructose sweeteners are found in everything, from ketchup to hot dogs to hamburgers to all of these different foods. It's found in all of these different foods and drinks. And those things are not helpful. The entire world is getting heavier. This might not be a bad prescription. Get your padlock, put it on the refrigerator, put it on your pantry, put it on something. You know that in the last decade, the number one research, and it was so simple, remember? Simple solutions to complex problems. You know what was found to be the number one longevity ingredient to help you live longer? Wow, it's so simple. A calorie-restricted diet. Eating less calories per day actually allows you to live longer. Is that easy? Eating more calories per day actually helps you die sooner. So we need to implement permanent lifestyle changes. Low fat, a plant-based diet, these things are helpful. And get out and exercise. In closing, I want to give you just a quick exercise formula to get your heart rate going, that you can write down and kind of monitor on yourself. Remember, you're going to make exercise what? A habit. Not just once in a while, a habit. You take your age, let's say you're 20, you subtract it from 220, and you multiply it by 70%. That's your target heart rate. So take your age, subtract it from 220, and multiply it times 70%. That's your target heart rate. In order to really exercise, you have to bring your heart rate up to your target rate. Otherwise, you're not really giving yourself a proper workout. That makes it specific for you and your age. And by the way, you always want to get doctor clearance so that you're not going to hurt yourself if you're not able to enter into an exercise program right off the bat, to make sure that all systems are go. So if you're 20 years old, you take 20 off 220, you come up 200 times 70%, you're allowed, your ideal range should be about 140 beats per minute. That's where you should keep your heart rate for about 20 to 30 minutes and get the full benefits. See, diabetes looks pretty ugly when you start losing things. And the #1 cause for amputation in this country and in our country is diabetes. Diabetes is #1 cause. I like this Bible verse, Proverbs 27:12. A prudent person foresees the danger ahead and takes precautions. But the simpleton, he goes blindly and suffers the consequences. See, in nature there are consequences. When there's too much of something and not enough of something else, what are there? Consequences. Serious consequences. Whether it's in the world of nature or within the physiology of our body. I hope for all of us that this lecture, this very simple explanation of diabetes, has allowed you to understand how this condition works. What makes the condition? What are the simple applications you can use to help treat this condition? And type 2 diabetes, in many, many cases, can be treated totally by lifestyle. Dietary changes and lifestyle changes to where people can live happy and healthy lives. So my wish for you all here in Vancouver is that you're going to be in your beautiful city, you're going to be walking all the trails, you're going to be eating all that good food, and you will live healthy and happy lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baur, for the lecture. And we want to say that according to the program you have received, next weekend seems to be the last weekend of meetings, but as it has been announced here, we are planning some cooking classes. So next weekend we are planning to announce to you the place of the cooking class and also the time when it's going to happen. And some of you have already registered and signed their name as interested in it. We will also let you know through email or through the phone. And now we also like to remind you, some of you that might not have yet received the DVDs of the lectures of the weeks before, we still have some of it available. And the DVD for the lectures of this week, weekend, they will be available next weekend. And now we would like to have a break, 5 or 10 minutes, right? And then we will come back for the last meeting this evening. Thank you.